Dead games. Not an unfamiliar concept. I'm pretty sure it's one we're all familiar with, to be honest. But what could be considered unfamiliar is how those games ended up that way in the first place. I feel like I should turn on my light. Now it seems more lively. I hope you didn't see my underwear. Zenith was huge. Similar to the A Township Tale video I made previously. Oh my god! Zenith was one of those games that had crazy potential. And yet now when looking around, this game is empty. Lifeless. Abandoned. A few other synonyms that I wrote down on my phone, but who cares? This game is unbelievably dead and buried. A game that seemed to have had all the attention a couple years back. Hype and love, and with all the cards in its hand, they unfortunately ended up dropping the ball. But how? Why? With the type of release that this game had, it seemed like it was almost too big to fail. Especially in VR's case, because I feel like MMORPGs at the time of this game's release were still a rarity. Although this definitely isn't the first time I'm talking about Zenith the Last City, considering that it was one of the first reviews on this channel, I'm damn well gonna do it again. Zenith seemed to take what was already so good about tons of VR MMORPGs in the market. Well, whatever was there at the time, and capitalize and add on to what it needed. With different leveling systems and unfortunately only 2 classes at the time of its release, it showed a lot of promise and potential as long as they kept the updates and communication coming. Much like I talked about in my first video on Zenith, this was a really fresh type of gameplay to get back into because VR just didn't really have much in terms of VR MMORPGs, and some of the companies that may have tried to have made these sorts of games didn't really do much with what they had. I am looking directly at you, A Township. No shade, no shade, no shade. With different types of gear, cooking mechanics, climbing challenges, raids, and eventually a good focus on the social aspect of the game like housing, this game seemed to be really put together by a passionate team of devs. They eventually added like a third class being, I think it was called like the Cyborg or the Shadow Ninja, and I think I originally used like the Sword Dude and then eventually went to the Shadow Ninja guy, which I think may have brought a little bit of a resurgence of players, but like still not anymore. Let me check right now. Oh, that is a brutal number. I'm not even gonna lie. That's rough, bro. No, no shade or anything. I'm just like, damn. Whew, damn. I caught me off guard. Along with that, it seemed like there was several different skill trees, so you could build one of these 2 at the time, but then eventually 3 classes into like several different types of subclasses. Each of them, I believe, had their own like DPS, tank, and support role within that one class, so you'd at least have the opportunity to branch out into 6 to 9. That totally made me lose my train of thought, I'm not gonna lie to you. To these 6 to 9 skill trees, and then I think they even branched out way more within later updates. Along with that, there was a ton of different gear that had their own types of themes depending on the area that you were in, and then I think they eventually changed it so you could have the gear that would help level you up, but then you could also have specific gear depending on the aesthetic that you like of each area, which was good. As well as the movement and the traversal overall was really cool. It was nice to be able to climb any sort of surface that you looked at and be able to glide anywhere as your new method of faster traversal, and you would have these gusts of wind that would blow you up, so then it would help gain your stamina and upkeep your stamina, so then you can continue flying all around the area. I don't know, it was nice to just like have that sort of traversal, as well as just having several chests of loot on the map that could help you upgrade your skills, upgrade your gear, upgrade anything. And then they even had, way later down the line, their own little Pokemon game too, which now with Nintendo's patent against Power World, I'm wondering if Zenith can get in shit for that too. Bro, probably, but if the game was still active, I guess. I don't know, that whole Nintendo thing's stupid. That's a whole side tangent I'm not going to get into as of right now. But they even had their own Pokemon game where you could use these balls. I'm not going to say it in case Nintendo decides to hunt me down or some shit, but you could use these totally ambiguous balls to be able to toss it at these totally non-related creatures and then capture them. Whether you could use them for battle, I don't know. I don't get that far. And last but not least, the one part that I feel like I severely missed out on, unfortunately, was the raids. If you've played an MMORPG before, you know the raids, but if you haven't, or if you want more context, it was the type of raids where, you know, you would go through these giant labyrinths with, like, I believe it was up to 6 players in this game, exploring dungeons, solving puzzles, fighting a bunch of waves of enemies along your way to a final boss, where then you could fight them and just gather up a bunch of loot, which Genuinely seemed like a really fun play pattern, but I guess I just was not feeling social enough to be able to gather a party of 6 people. But in gathering 6 people, in gathering people in general, I did manage to, by God's green earth, I managed to actually get some of my friends to play this game with me. Which we have a couple of clips on my previous video where you see me like running around and like fighting a bunch of monsters and farming and doing quests with friends. So it was nice to be able to actually experience a lot of that with somebody. And I wish I had been a little more social like I had been on a lot of the Alta-based games. But I guess at the time I was feeling a little more anxious for some reason when it came to engaging with other players, just because with MMOs I feel like people are so busy doing their own thing they don't usually want to party. I don't fucking know. That was years ago. But with the gameplay, this game had so much promise, so much longevity, and it actually felt like a complete package delivered within its release. Sure, there was stuff to be fixed, sure there was stuff to be improved on, but it actually felt like we got a complete package, which I know nowadays is rare because everything is early access. And if it wasn't for the backing as well as the community support, I feel like this game wouldn't have been how it was on release. And I want to expand a bit on the community as well. Since VR is just such a niche already, the idea of a larger community like supporting a game is already almost unheard of, or was unheard of at the time. And I felt like there was so much hype built for this game. I remember attending their live streams whenever I think they were giving out codes for access to Zenith, I believe, or at least they had some sort of raffle for it. But I remember actually being in the live streams, being excited for this game, because I think I had played a Township Tale and I was hoping that I was similar to that. And although I was a little bugged that they didn't have the same types of physics, I was hyped to see that they could, implement a hell of a lot more players, have a full-scaled world, and so many more things that a lot of other MMOs didn't bring at the time. And even just being in those live streams before the release of the game, it just genuinely seemed like there was so much hype, and it actually helped bring a little more familiarity to VR, just because a lot of people were like, oh, this doesn't seem like a gimmick anymore. It actually seems like some of these games might have longevity. It might actually pool a bunch of hours from me. It might seem interesting. And it was at the time. So then when me and this community eventually got brought into this game by the time of its release, the world that we were faced with was unlike any other we have ever seen before. Although I barely remember the actual story of the game itself, all I know is that like you were the last city, right? Because shit went bad, I guess. Although there's like outposts and technically other cities. I don't know what their definition of a city is, because there was definitely more than one city. But in terms of like a city, there was like one last city because everything got overran by, I don't know. I'm not going to try and explain the story. This is not that type of video. What I do remember is the world building that they had and the different types of environments that you were thrown in throughout your journey was absolutely mind-blowing. I do wish they had like a winter-like area, but they had like vast, lush forests. They had these somewhat abandoned, like magi technology-based mines. They had these industrial areas, like you could see some of the other broken down cities. You could see mystical air landscapes, mountain highlands, lush forests, pirates in the deserts, all sorts of things. It was really cool, as well as just a selection of different enemy types. And as the typical MMORPG, you see one variation of enemies, you can probably expect like 3 different colors just to base their difficulty. But even though that was the case, there was still a lot of variety in terms of the enemies and characters that they actually created, which was super dope. So yes, although you're bonking one different colored enemy with a different colored stick until you bonk another different colored enemy with another different colored stick, it still felt like things were changing. They had different movesets that actually were kind of dynamic. Some AoE, some had like line attacks, some had direct attacks, some had ranged. It felt like it was different every single encounter. Deadass, the level design was actually fire. I gotta give it to them. And just as I stated years back, this was the closest thing that felt to Sword Art Online, which I know when you hear VR and MMO, the first thing that pops up in most people's minds if they're familiar with it is probably Sword Art Online. I bet the devs probably had that in the back of their minds anyways. And then to even have elements of like cooking in the game. I'm not going to go too much over the base of it because a lot of it is described in my previous video, but to even have like cooking in the game, and that can give you buffs as well, was a really cool mechanic. And then eventually to add housing to the game so people could customize their own homes, have other players there, really reinforce the social aspect of it, and even bring some of that like VR chat vibe to it. I understand that they were hitting a lot of the elements of a typical MMO. But as amazing as this game is, it fell, and it fell hard. which was very unfortunate. And I think that was because of a few things. Now, here's where we describe some of the bad elements and the things that I think hurt it, as well as what a lot of people have voiced online as well, from what I've seen. One of the biggest things that I think everybody seemed to complain about was going free to play. Now, they did this weird thing where it was originally called Zenith the Last City for like 2 years, I believe. And then they released a dungeon crawler, like, similar game where you just run through dungeons and kill a bunch of enemies called Zenith Nexus. And I believe the Last City was about $40, and then eventually they just took over the title of the Last City and changed it to Zenith Nexus, which was free for everybody. But they still made the Last City a DLC this time instead. So they made the main game free to play. They basically swapped what was actually the main game and turned it free to play, and then made others that wanted to play the super engaging story, I guess, I don't know, paid for DLC. It always kind of hurts everybody to have a game that was paid for originally free to play. And although it, you know, opens up accessibility for other players, which I think is like a good benefit, I think unless players are given something, they do feel a little bit betrayed or annoyed with a specific company. And along with that, a lot of criticisms that I tend to hear, because I didn't play much Zenith Nexus, I was well done with the game after that, is that a lot of people said that the dungeon runner was like pretty lifeless. You know, they had a vast variety of enemies, but there didn't feel like there was much to it overall. So going free to play and kind of just like abandoning the overall MMO really, really hurt this game's reputation, as well as the devs as well. Another thing that I think is basically just community and career soups and salads, I'll say, is not communicating well with the community, not addressing stuff with the community. You know, you have these people that support you, that build your platform, that build your program, and love what you do, and they come to you with valid criticisms. Don't get me wrong, there'll always be trolls that say stupid shit. That's just a part of the process. But you have people that come with these valid criticisms in terms of how you can improve your game. And a lot of people that I have read upon so far, once again, I'm not too into this community, so I didn't experience it as much. But a lot of people felt like the devs ignored the community, which I feel like is one of the fastest ways you can kill anything. Any idea, any passion, any game, anything that has support, that has the support of other people. And completely ignoring the community, they felt like, you know, they didn't really address the bug fixes. They kept adding a bunch more content without finishing the end game, and I didn't get to experience the end game, but I did come back every once in a while to see a lot of new things placed around the beginning. But I'm guessing for the players that grinded to the end game, they felt like there just wasn't really much ahead for them. Like, it was cool to see that new area. I think the sky base or whatever, where you could use a grapple hook and like mine rocks and like chop down trees, which is a really, really cool game mechanic around the beginning. I like the fact that they kept on innovating on stuff like that, but I guess they just missed a portion of what else they could have been adding on, or at least additional DLCs. And not to be that person that pushes for like additional paid game content, but to have, I mean, it could have been a free DLC, but to have DLCs or extensions, kind of like how World of Warcraft does it. I feel like VR developers can really take notes of what's worked with flat screen gaming a lot of the time when it comes to the longevity of their games, and just adapt from that. I would have just looked at World of Warcraft and said, what's kept that game up for God knows how many years at this point. People also felt like there was a bit of unnecessary nerfs to a lot of classes or attacks or weapons. I'm not necessarily certain, is what it is. Or at least just overall balancing issues, which kind of sucks. And the fact that the devs apparently couldn't really take criticism that well. Which, criticism is going to be the building blocks of anything great. Whether it's your own, whether it's from somebody you know, or whether it's from an unknown person. But I think it's important to always take criticism regardless of whatever you do, if you want to just make whatever you do better. And barely any transparency, which is something that I've consistently talked about in a lot of videos, which I glazed the ever-living shit out of Blade and Sorcery for, which I am now glazing Reeve for, as a matter of fact. Whether or not it was, you know, maybe because a lot of the staff from Ulta had changed or something along the lines of that, but overall they seemed really, really open with their devlogs. Repo is another good example of this. They have weekly videos updating on what's happening. And even A&B Seth, which is the developer for Gunmen Contracts, which originally started as a Half-Life mod and is now going in its full game. That's going to be a video later, maybe even a video series, who knows, because that game looks super sick and I'm excited for it. But all those companies are like really good examples of just overall brand to player transparency, but apparently people did not get that from Zenith, which is very unfortunate because of how much support this game had. And it's crazy that they didn't really have this transparency or need for criticism, considering the fact that I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong in the comments, but they got like $45 million in funding, which for a VR developer is absolutely insane. To get that sort of backing, to get that sort of support and that funding, and not try and adapt to what the players would like within that game, seems like a very, very irresponsible move, in my opinion. I don't know, to me that's like the fastest fucking way to kill a game. It seems like they had done everything to build this absolutely phenomenal, beautiful, and diverse game, but then just didn't really have the plans from where to go once it was done. And that's where I also want to expand on hitting a content wall like really quickly. Instead of investing in adding on to what was left over, they just wanted to revamp stuff that didn't really need immediate attention, as I previously mentioned. It almost seems like they focused more on the money than the community, and sometimes I can agree that, you know, your fans don't always know exactly everything that they want, but to a certain degree, they kind of do know what they want. There needs to be a good balance of being able to like innovate and, you know, craft ideas on your own, but then also take a little bit of inspiration in terms of what the fans like. That's why like mod support is great in games, because to me I'm just like, oh, mod support basically says, hey, your fans want this one thing. I don't know if it'll work for Zenith, I'm just gonna be real, but I'm just yapping about mod support in general. But mod support is like one of those things where it's like, oh, your fans really like this, or would really like to invest in this sort of thing. It would be a really cool update if you just made this mod right here an official thing. So then 1, it runs well for everybody. 2, it's actually implemented in their game. 3, it's like a nod off to the community to be like, we fuck with you guys too. We're building this game together. It's like a collaborative project. That really strengthens and reinforces community. But like, you gotta listen to them just because the fans already bought the game, which shows that they like you. They fuck with your vibe already, and like, you just gotta stick to it. Even besides the fact that they didn't really innovate in terms of what could have been added more towards the end game, it seems like even the spacing between DLCs was just incredibly large. So a lot of people would grind the game heavily, put their hours in, and then immediately lose interest because there's not really anything either coming ahead or anything to expect. And even though it brought me back a few times, I felt myself kind of getting bored relatively quicker than expected. Now, of course, the cycles when it comes to gaming, you know, loop in and loop out. You have the 2-week Minecraft phase for a reason. So there's going to be occasions where I dip super hard into the game and then I don't dip as hard into the game, of course. But without any sort of communication, without any sort of things to look forward to, and without any of the things that we complain about being addressed, there's almost no reason for me to come back to this game. And if you're not going to do that job, someone else is going to. Look at the different type of MMORPGs that we have as of the VR MMORPGs that we have as of right now that were probably inspired off of Zenith, which might be trying to capitalize on their failure. I'm even reading as of right now, people say that they spent almost all their dev time remaking the tutorial and left the rest of the game to rot. And from all the criticism that I'm currently reading as of right now, everybody was on their side, which is very unfortunate. And with the moves that they made, a lot of the community feels betrayed. They had already accomplished so much with having extremely large servers for VR at the very least, being able to manage all these players all at once, and with the amount of hype that they've built and the world that they built and everything overall was quite the accomplishment for VR at the time. And maybe this project was a little too ambitious, you know, besides the $45 million backing. Don't get me wrong, I'm not a dev. But that amount of money just shows how much interest was in the game overall. And it shows that people are ready to give their money to whatever if the idea or project sounds enticing enough. So overall, it looks like free to play and abandoning the MMO, ignoring their community, as well as just hitting a content wall relatively quickly, were at least just some of the features that kind of ruined this game. And now when I go back, exploring every single area that this game originally had filled with tons and tons of excited players ready to tackle on a new challenge, a new idea, a new VRMMORPG, I see nothing. This is not new news. Of course, the studio mentioned that the game was shutting down like a year ago. Well, not shutting down, but at the very least there's going to be no more content updates after their summer one, maybe like 1 or 2 years ago. So this is very much old news, but I kind of just wanted to look back in terms of how this game seemed to rise to the top and fall so drastically, and what went wrong with it. And it's very unfortunate because I feel like even to this day, there are a lot of VRMMOs that have been inspired from this game. And although it isn't what it used to be anymore, there was a time where this was one of the biggest VR games to have ever released. And I think my only regret is the fact that I didn't play it as much as I should have at the time to really experience that, to really take in everything they had to offer. But I'm sure that another one will come at some point. And hopefully, pay attention to their community, to the failures of other companies and branches that may have done the same, and do better. But I guess we'll see. Maybe I'll look at that Elements Divided game. I'm not really certain, to be honest with you. Made it to the end. Thank you for watching the video. Leave.